how can you be working multiple jobs and still not able to afford your health care, still not able to pay for food?
It's not really a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
Every dollar is attached to a human being.
The more money we get from the federal government, the more strings that are attached with that money, and the less control we have on a local and state level.
The squeeze on the state budget with what's coming down from the federal government, it's only going to get worse.
Right?
Oh, it's imminent.
And welcome in. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Hummel. Today we have Paige Parks. Billy Hunt, welcome. We talk a lot about the budget on Lively, and it's interesting. The Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council is kind of a watchdog group, had some pretty harsh words. So, Billy, let me begin with you. For state leaders saying that we're at $14.3 billion now, that this is unsustainable. At some point, we need to look at cuts. Something that a lot of us have probably been saying, but we haven't heard it from RIPAC.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is exactly what us as libertarians talk about all the time. It's not really a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. And there's programs that we run in the state that have been ballooning over the years that haven't been addressed and haven't been looked at. I'm a big proponent of zero-based budgeting. I feel like a lot of the stuff that gets spent is stuff that gets, they have to, at the end of the year, fill out the budget and get rid of the money as it is, and they're moving the funds around, as you can see, where they get surplus funds from the federal government or from leftover COVID money, and using that to backfill these budget deficits, and that's just not sustainable over the long term. If you have a structural deficit, eventually we're going to run out of money at some point without doing something to fix it.
But we got to look at how those dollars are being spent. So the RIPAC report shows the large growth of spending in health and human services. Those are needs that people have. Those are services that people really rely on. So the RIPAC report does also show that some of the increased investments, especially in the Medicaid reimbursement rates, were needed, long overdue, because we had not had really competitive reimbursement rates. We were losing really important healthcare providers in our state. So those investments were needed. There are extensive needs in our state, and decreasing the spending is only one part of the issue. We also need to look at our revenue streams and ways to increase our revenue streams. And the General Assembly needs to look at and pick back up their proposal for the taxing the top 1%. Because if we cut more things, that is the livelihoods of many people. We can't have children without homes, children without food. We need to look at some other additional options to making sure that we are also taking care of our people.
Yeah, and those spending is very important, and you don't want to go ahead and have a subset of the population that's not covered by health care or not getting the services they need. But what we need to look at is that, it's just like a family budget. If you're running over your budget, spending more than you're taking in, after a while, you're going to go bankrupt and you're not going to be able to provide for those children in general. So it's not something that is obviously a short-term need that we can't just turn the spigot off and leave these people in the lurch. But we need to have real leadership and to address these structural issues. Backfilling our budgets with one-time, federal money and things, and having a built-in structural deficit is not the answer. And expanding the revenue stream, we can do that by increasing the tax base, by getting some of these people that are on Medicaid, that get them off the service and get them back into jobs that provide better health services, that are higher paying jobs, that pull them out of poverty, instead of having this hard cap line where people can't necessarily improve themselves, because if they do, not only are they losing the Medicaid benefits, they're losing welfare benefits, they're losing SNAP benefits, and you've kind of trapped these people in a perpetual cycle of being in poverty, and that's something that we should be working to pull people out of. So nobody wants to take these services away, but I think this is a larger systemic issue that's built in due to our state leadership that provides us with this issue. So, I mean...
Well, there's definitely a systemic issue. And one thing that I think needs to be also understood is that folks who are on many of these supports, on SNAP, on Medicaid, they are working families, right? So the problem is also, how can you be working multiple jobs and still not able to afford your health care, still not able to pay for food? So the report, actually, the RIPAC report did also mention the need to have transparency around what is driving healthcare costs. I think that's something that we really need to understand better. But for families who are in this position, the government has a role in protecting the welfare of people, but also business has a really important role. So how many employers who are making profits, how many of their employees are on Medicaid? How many of their employees can't feed their families or can't pay rent? Or at risk
When you're
of
saying they should be getting that from the business.
They should be, if they're working, they should be able to provide and support themselves.
But
as well,
are those
right?
Rhode
So there's another aspect of this as well too.
But are those Rhode Island businesses, or are those larger businesses, corporations that have operations in Rhode Island that are providing the Walmarts and the big box stores and those types of things? Because that's really the issue. Is we're talking about state budget, and that type of issue. We're trying to attack the 1% and the Taylor Swift tax and all this other tax and everything in the Rhode Island state budget, and that's a larger federal issue. And a big part of the Rhode Island state budget is the percentage of money we get from the federal government that we run through the state budget to then allocate to all of our things. So the more and more money we take, which in Rhode Island is second in the country behind Alaska on a per capita basis for the amount of money that we get from the federal government. The more money we get from the federal government, the more strings that are attached with that money and the less control we have on a local and state level. So all the things that we're talking about, yes, it's important. Yes, we need to be addressing them. But when we start talking about taxing the rich in Rhode Island and taxing them to address those issues, it's not solving the problem when such a large proportion of our budget is coming from the federal government and the mess that's going on with Congress and everything.
And that's why they're talking about, and that may be why the speaker held back on the taxing the upper tier because they're not sure what they're going to lose. I guess, and RIPAC brought this up too. The budget right before COVID was $9.5 billion. It's gone up 45 to 50% since then. And a lot of that federal money that you talked about rolling through, now it's gone, but the budget hasn't gone down. And so that's what kind of surprised me is that why didn't the budget go back to 11, 12, 12.5 billion?
It was supposed to be one-time spending that wasn't going to be built into the ongoing future of the budget. That was what was sold to us. That was what everybody said. I think when you actually kind of go back and take a look, that was the idea, but a lot of the money got shifted around and reallocated, and money's fungible. You can go ahead and say that it's restricted for this, but if you use federal or COVID money to free up certain sections of the budget, that's less money that you have to then allocate that you can put towards these special projects and these fundings that are again, creating the structural deficit that we're in and the systemic problem that we're dealing with.
So what's your proposal then?
Again, we need to limit what we're asking our state government to do. I mean, this is something that is an issue. Everybody has compassion. Everybody wants to help the next person, but there's the next best need. There's always going to be somebody that we can focus on that needs something, that is underprivileged, that doesn't have the same benefit as everybody else. But again, we have to look at private solutions in other ways instead of just, great ideas don't require force. If we can have a good idea and a good plan and good leadership, there's going to be a lot of buy-in. A lot of people will be willing to get on board with something like that. I can't tell you what it is, but it's not state government or federal government is not the answer.
Yeah, and I would love to see what those proposals are, because I think we often look at our state government to fix all the problems, which it can't do. It can't fix all the problems. There's not enough money to fix all the problems, and what we do as advocates is try to help by giving data and information and saying how do these decisions actually impact people on the ground.
And how do they? What are the outcomes? How is the performance? What has the results been? The positive? What have they done well? What has the state done well with all of the issues that we are talking about? Like, what does the state? Can you point at and say, hey, they knocked it out of the park on this. They got the results that were expected, and we took a look at it 10 years later, and that was a good investment of taxpayer dollars. I mean, you're hard-pressed to come up with an example because we live in 2-year election cycles. And so instead of focusing on the long-term issue, I mean, a lot of what this decision was probably made about, Dan McKee had the back of the head that he's going to have a tough re-election coming up. So instead of going and doing what's best for the taxpayer, doing what's best for the Rhode Island citizen and the children, you're doing what's politically expedient for the leadership, and that's not the answer. That's not the answer to what anybody wants. And the only way to solve that issue is by limiting the amount of power that the state government has. And that's, again, some people may get hurt by that. Some people may lose benefits, but there's going to be other ways and other things that come back to backfill that loss.
Billy hasn't brought out the libertarian mantra yet, and he said this before: taxation is theft. Yes, taxation is theft. I know that's a little. So we'll get back to answering that in just a second. Inspector General, how do you feel about that? Bringing on an Inspector General to, like, if we want more revenue. I know that was a Republican talking point years ago. Now it's got bipartisan support. There's some Democrats have come on board. They've had one for a long time in Massachusetts. If we're really looking to squeeze more revenue out, wouldn't you think in a $14 billion budget we could find some level of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, so you always need to be looking at making sure that funds are being used adequately, efficiently, using evidence-based models and approaches and programs. Absolutely, I think that should happen. Does it need to be an inspector general or some other form of department or agency that's doing that type of work? I'm not sure where it needs to live, but having absolutely an eye on how tax dollars are being spent is extremely important, and to make sure that when investments are being made, it's being looked at by who needs what the most, that will have outcomes for the entire state as well. So having an equitable approach and looking at how we're making these investments and ensuring that there's not fraud, waste, or abuse. Absolutely, we need to make sure we're doing that.
It's something I'm not opposed to. I mean, obviously, there's a cost that's associated with bringing on an additional department. I mean, they used to say that $1 million was the figure they always threw around, and $1 million isn't what it used to be. So, I mean, it's something that I don't think would be that difficult to fit into our budget. I think the issue is that leadership doesn't want people second guessing what they're doing, and I don't think there's a lot of good press that's going to come out of an inspector general for anybody in leadership. So I don't think there's a lot of appetite for that. But I mean, realistically, our elected officials should all be the inspector general for the departments that they're in charge of. I mean, that's really what we elect people to do, is to be good stewards of our money and to make sure that they're being effective in their governing. And that really hasn't been happening.
And the leadership, Speaker Sicarci and Senate President Val Lawson defended in the RIPAC article. They said, hey, look, we made the investments into primary care, which were needed, and other things. I guess I talked to Joe Sicarci about 6 weeks ago. I did a one-on-one, and he said, look, if you want things, I don't have a lot of people in my membership saying cut, cut, cut. And if they do, he says, where? You know, he said, what are you going to, what people are attached to line items? He said, if you want something different, an outcome here, you got to elect different people. And I know you've been in the trenches. You ran for state rep a couple of times in the Libertarian Party, but isn't that the reality? If you're going to get change, you need other people in the General Assembly.
Well, I got second place 4 years in a row running for state representative. It was a special election thrown in there as well. But again, it's something that is very difficult to say, that you have to run a campaign based upon something, again, like cutting services. There's not a lot of, number one, that's against the political grain of what we have here in the state. So there's not a lot of belief that that's going to be effective, and that, you know, if you do get elected, it's kind of like a dog chasing a car. You're going to get up there and you're not going to be able to provide back to your community what the current representation is actually providing to them in the form of legislative grants, programs and everything like that. So it's very difficult to go against the grain and get elected. Even independents in my same district have gotten similar percentage of the votes for the state representative position. So I guess the question is for Speaker Sicarci is when people are motivated to get something from their government, it's easy to get elected. How do you get people elected who are advocating for cutting their government? That's the real question, is because the people of Rhode Island, on a grand scheme of things, is such a small percentage of their tax dollars, which is ever increasing, that are going to these programs. It's almost just throw your hands up and say, we got to, put up with the good with the bad.
Last thoughts on this?
Well, cutting government or cutting services also, right? So there's a distinction there.
That is a distinction, yeah.
And things are just going to get worse. We're going to have more needs. The squeeze on the state budget with what's coming down from the federal government, it's only going to get worse.
Right?
Oh, it's imminent. It's going to get worse. They're going to have a squeeze on our budget because of Medicaid and SNAP and the increase that we will have to, as a state, have to pay in to fill the holes of that federal gap. It's going to be very large. And like Speaker Sicarci said, every dollar is attached to a human being, into a face. So to just cut means you are taking away important things that help people live and help people go to work and help people go to school. We need to see this as a holistic approach. So we need different solutions, cutting, I'm telling you, is not the answer. That is what's worse for our kids and for our state. How do we bring in more revenue while we're also addressing the long-term systemic issues that absolutely do need to be addressed? How do we end poverty in our state? How do we do that? We need to have a real discussion about that.
Well, going back to my original point, when you're relying so much on the federal government, and when the administration changes and you have those cuts looming, you don't get to make that decision for yourself. And that's something that we need to look at as the state, is that do we have to forego some of those federal dollars to retain some of that control, to focus on what we feel as a community is important. So.
All right, Billy, Paige, thank you. We could go on all day on this. This may continue after. We'll have to tape that off studio. Folks, thank you, and join us back here next time on Lively.